Hello everybody, it's me Dylan again. Today I'm going to be teaching you about theory and topicality. First, topicality is basically a question as to whether or not the affirmative is related to the topic. So uh, it's based on how your opponent defines certain terms and like what their definitions are, and so like if their definitions are faulty or unfair or just completely unrelated, then that's when you would kind of call them out on topicality. And one example is if the topic is the House ought to have more power than the Senate. Uh, this would obviously be talking about the House of Representatives. So if your opponent defines the House as the Waffle House, then that would not be topical, and you should run topicality on them. Why is the topicality of the affirmative put into question? It's abusive for the affirmative to run a case arguing something unrelated to the topic because neg has no way to be prepared to argue it, because obviously they're not going to know that the affirmative is going to have these faulty definitions. So that also makes it skewed in the AF's advantage, and there's a limited amount of research on the neg side to write a case, so it'd be very hard for them to actually refute what the AF is saying. One example is if the topic is the United States should eliminate its nuclear arsenals. Uh, a non-topical case would define the United States as the United States of Mexico, which is obviously not what the topic would be talking about, so therefore it would be non-topical. How to debate topicality: you would run this thing called a T-shell, and the parts of a T-shell are: first, you would have to provide your own definitions to replace your opponent's, and basically, or next would be violation. You have to show how the affirmative violates your definition and basically why theirs aren't correct. And then next, you have to argue why your definition is superior. So basically, why yours are actually the correct definitions and the affirmatives are not the correct definitions. And then in the voting issue, you explain to the judge why they should vote for you based on topicality debate and explain how it's unfair and things like that. So talking about superiority, part of the T-shell, there are a couple things you can talk about. Limits. Certain definitions of words can limit the topic. If a certain definition of a word overlimits or underlimits the topic, the definition is not topical. So you could also talk about prep skew, the fact that the app can prep whatever they want because they can basically make their definitions whatever they want, which is completely unfair and would skew it in their favor because they can basically talk about whatever they want and the neg would not be prepared. There's ground standard. There's when there's not enough topic literature due to the affirmative's chosen position / ground, there wouldn't be any good clash, and it's unfair. So it's not really debating, it's more them just talking and the neg not being able to do anything. So it's not really an actual debate, which makes it unfair and not fun. Also, there's grammar. So if they have nothing to do with the topic, it's not topical. There's the source of their definition must be reliable, and it must be predictable, obviously, so both sides can prepare a case based on the same definition. Definition can't be outdated, has to be by a dictionary, and then sometimes if it's like a study, or in this example, written by a field like a military, these are called field definitions, those can also be used as long as they're reliable. And then another thing you can talk about is common usage. So the definition has to fit common usage, and it should apply to normal interpretation. So basically, the most common usage of the word. This is most of the time, but if there's a topic where one definition is clear that it's supposed to be one thing, you would argue that, or you would use that definition, but most of the time it's common usage. So this example, schools should be defined as educational institutions, not a group of fish, because educational institutions is obviously a more commonly used definition. Then under the voting issues, basically why you explain, or it's where you would explain why the judge should vote for you based on topicality. You have to explain that their case being non-topical makes the debate unfair. It's skewed in their favor because they can prepare whatever they want. So the judge can't decide who's actually the better debater because they're not arguing on the same topic. And then you can also talk about that the point of debating is basically to learn, and if it's not a fair debate, then there's no educational value. Nobody learns. It's kind of just basically two people talking about different things. So overall, if their definitions are not topical, you run a T-shell, you list your definitions, the violation, why their definition is bad, superiority, why your definition is better, and then voting issue, why your judge should care and why they should vote in your favor because of it. Now on to theory. Theory basically proposes a rule that your opponent needs to follow. They don't have to really be related to the topic, unlike topicality. That's kind of like involves the topic. This doesn't. So it's often used to point out things that I guess you can call abuse. Things such as spreading, which is when they talk super fast, like very, very fast, so you wouldn't be able to hear what they're saying, and that would make the debate unfair. They rip your flow. They're using the internet, which you're usually not allowed to do. They lied during cross-ex, or they're just verbally attacking you personally and not actually debating. So when abusive things like these happen, you should be able to defend yourself, obviously, and that is the entire point of theory. It basically explains the same thing. When abusive things happen, we have to be able to defend ourselves when they're doing something that's not right. And you're basically saying, my opponent did this, which is unfair, and therefore they should lose because of it. So similar to a topicality shell, for theory you just run a theory shell. It's a little different. You do an interpretation, which is what rule you're trying to enforce, and then a violation, obviously how your opponent broke that rule. Standards, why your rule is good and why it should be considered, and then voter, why we care about these standards. Here's an example. If your opponent takes your flow and rips it in half, your interpretation could be that you should have the opportunity to write down and record the arguments that they're making, and the violation would be obviously that they ripped your flow, so you're not able to do that. You're not able to record the arguments. And then standard, in order for the debate to be fair, both opponents should have an equal opportunity to be prepared to respond, and then your opponent or whoever it is obviously made it unfair because they ripped your flow. And then voter, you just basically tell the judge to vote in your favor to uphold the fairness of the debate. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.